Hello, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the webinar. Today we're launching our new research report. It's very exciting. Why resource efficiency is a missed opportunity in manufacturing, which we produced, of course, in partnership with the manufacturer at the end of last year, 2018. This presentation will last perhaps up to 45 minutes, leaving about 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. Questions can be typed into the question box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen all the way through the webinar. So just ask the questions through there whenever you're ready, and they'll be answered by the speakers at the end of the session. This session is, of course, being recorded and will be sent out to all of those who registered after the session, along with the research itself, of course. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction to Manufacture 2030, and my name is Martin Chilcott. I'm the founder and chairman of the company. I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Donoghue, who's the head of our product, and Matt Pulser, who's the managing editor of the manufacturer, and who will share with us his thoughts on the research, how we did it, who we spoke to, and what the key findings really are. So just very quickly on Manufacture 2030, the company and its software as a service platform, the Bee, are on a mission to help manufacturers halve their resources that they use by 2030. Of course, this is, good for costs, reducing risks, and of course, reducing environmental impacts. We're managing resource efficiency in such a way as to help make it simpler for manufacturers by making best-in-class know-how available to all without the need for expensive consultants. Now, Nick will explain a little bit more about this in the final section when he talks about the Bee in particular and how we are using this research to make it more effective at addressing your resource efficiency challenges. Just to be clear, by resource efficiency, I mean non-labor resources, so that's energy, water, materials, and in a negative sense, the cost of waste. And these costs are often 50% plus of a manufacturing plant's input costs. Resource efficiency, of course, is sometimes called environmental sustainability, but it's essentially the same thing. If there's really a difference, it's just that when we use the word resource efficiency, no one doubts we're saving the money. And conversely, when we use the term sustainability, we can allow ourselves to feel a little smug. But otherwise, there's no difference really at all. In many countries right now, labor productivity is struggling. Like our friends here in this picture, we've underinvested in technology and over-relied on labor. If the answer to our productivity weakness is renewed investment in Industry 4.0, into robots and cobots and new machinery and digitalization and digital twins, etc., many countries and many companies have a lot of catching up to do. And of course, in the UK, we've had some very recent research done by the EEF and their investment monitor showing that manufacturing investment is weakening further in the face of that wonderful Brexit uncertainty that we have over here at the moment. But this is also a challenge around the rest of the world where it's being affected by the global slowdown. So there's a very interesting question. How can we boost profits, competitiveness, and productivity at a time of weakening investment? And the answer may be resource efficiency. Cambridge University's Institute for Manufacturing did some research recently which shows that if every factory could optimize their resource efficiency and operate as best in class, then on average, that they would improve their bottom line by 12%. And in the UK, that would mean that UK PLC would boost the economy by 10 billion pounds. Of course, the importance of resource efficiency will only grow. Our investment in technology in Industry 4.0 will mean that the proportion of costs that comes from resources other than labor, in particular energy, is only going to increase. And as the economy as a whole decarbonizes, And in particular, I think as electric vehicles come online in large numbers, there will be an increasing risk of security of supply of energy for manufacturing plants. Resource efficiency is also of growing importance because global manufacturing represents 36% of greenhouse gases today. And with a shrinking window to sort out climate change, we're now given 12 years by the IPCC's latest report. Resource efficiency will become increasingly important for manufacturers to help us mitigate regulatory risks, reputational risks, and to maintain our license to operate. The good news, according to the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge, is that big resource efficiency gains are possible. That the best in class who are operating at 7% per annum are halving their resource intensity every 10 years. So these are some of the automotive manufacturers in particular. But if you're an average company and you're competing against best in class, over a 5-year period, your competitor, is gaining a 26% resource cost advantage over you. So it's a significant challenge for those who are becoming laggards. But even better news, though, from the same Cambridge study, is that just about every factory can close that gap to best in class, and it doesn't require significant capital investment or new innovations and magic bullets. It just requires the know-how and the capability of best in class to be available to all and to be acted upon. Leads us very nicely now for me to think of handing over to Matthew, because of course we carried out the research with the manufacturer to find out why best in class wasn't the norm and why companies were leaving so much money on the table. So Matt, as managing editor at the manufacturer and the team that helps us with this research, can I hand over to you to share with us how you went about it and the findings, please?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matt Fultzer, managing editor for Manufacturer. I used to be an engineer. I was an engineer for 10 years and then moved over to journalism and editing magazines, most recently The Manufacturer, where I've worked for 2.5 years. And The Manufacturer is a magazine that's very keen on supporting Made in Britain. And we particularly focus on improvements such as Industry 4 and, of course, what we're talking about today, which is resource efficiency. So next slide, please. So last summer, we ran a survey involving over 100 companies. We asked them a range of questions about their priorities, about what they found to be easy or difficult. We also did some in-depth interviews with people who actually work in companies, people at the coalface, and also managers. And we also spoke to an academic at the Institute for Manufacturing in Cambridge, which Martin has just mentioned. And it was a very, very interesting survey. We started off, the people we spoke to were mostly from SMEs, because SMEs are the most common kind of company. Over 50% of respondents came from SMEs, and most of the people we spoke to were senior management or executives. They were far and away the largest sector of people who responded to us. So next slide, please. This shows the key findings from the results of the survey. And as Martin has just mentioned, there is a huge opportunity that's being missed. When you look at non-labour resource efficiency and the cost reductions that are possible there, it's just not happening at the moment. We spoke to, as I just discussed, we spoke to senior management, and the good news is that by and large they are broadly in support of resource efficiency. It matches their company's values and aims. It's about saving money, and they are right behind that. But it's not easy. Finding the right teams and creating cooperation across a company is a real challenge. When we asked them what were the biggest barriers, They talked about time scarcity, they talked about complexity, and a really big worry was the risk of disruption to the production line. The result of this is that although there are some very good intentions, turning those intentions into action is a real challenge. And one of the biggest reasons for this, we found, was that manufacturers simply fail to set targets. And this means that there's a general vagueness within companies about what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, and whether or not they've even succeeded. Because if you haven't got a target, how do you know if you've met it? It's as simple as that. And last but not least, tying all of this together, there aren't the tools to do the job. There's a lot of will to do the job. People can see that there's money to be saved, but there isn't a system to bring it all together. Okay, next slide, please. We started off the survey with what we called the value proposition, which was, do respondents believe that there's an opportunity to improve their profit margin through resource efficiency? Sounds obvious, but it's an important question. And the good news is the vast majority of them say yes. A few said no, and there are a few companies where really all the added value is human input. An example might be a bespoke watchmaker. They don't use much metal, they don't use much electricity or water. It's all people and skill. But the vast majority of manufacturers are not like that, and they are all agreed that there are opportunities there. The people we spoke to were, of course, managers, and they're very, very busy people. They have a lot of competing priorities, whether it's chasing new opportunities, looking after their supply chain, keeping a close eye on health and safety. So although resource efficiency is seen as very important, it's not the only thing that's very important for them. They have a lot of things to manage. But nevertheless, nearly 60% of them did see it as a priority, a top priority, in fact. And they were happy to concede that it's not a zero-sum game, that they should find ways to carry on doing their normal day-to-day jobs and bring in resource efficiency as well. And there is a real thirst to reduce costs. It goes in as when we asked them in terms of what their priorities were, comparing things like health and safety and the supply chain, it was up there as one of the most important. But it should always be borne in mind that managers always have other things to do. Next slide, please. So here we focused in on something that I've just mentioned, which was the question of targets in terms of achieving resource efficiency. And we got to really what can only be described as quite a spiky response. You'll notice that there's a sprinkling of 1, 2, 3, 4% targets, which is not very ambitious. A fair chunk of people aim at 5%, and there are some that are very, very ambitious, all the way up at 10%. But you can see that far and away the most popular response was simply no target at all, followed almost second by we have a target but we don't know what it is. And if you add that lot up, it comes to 60%. So most manufacturers either don't have a target or don't know what their target is. And that's a real problem, because if you're not measuring things, how are you going to manage them? If you don't even have a target, how on earth do you know if you've succeeded? So that was quite a telling statistic. Next slide, please. We asked manufacturers when it came to saving energy, which is one of the most important resource efficiency targets, whether they looked at just the bottom line bill, we were charged X thousand last month, can we reduce it by 10% this month, or whether they looked at the cost per unit produced, which is really a much more sophisticated way of measuring your electricity. Initially, when companies start off on the resource efficiency route, they might just look to change out some inefficient motors, replace an inefficient, poorly lagged boiler, plug a leak in an airline. Once you've got rid of that low-hanging fruit of resource efficiency, you need to start getting more sophisticated. You need to say, I want to reduce my resource use per unit produced. And this is important, particularly in companies that are ambitious, that are looking to grow, because if you are growing and possibly automating at the same time, there's a fair chance that your absolute energy usage is going to rise. But if you're doubling your energy consumption, but at the same time trebling your output, then of course you're doing extremely well. But just looking at the bottom line, energy bill isn't going to tell you that. So it's important that along with setting targets, you set the right kind of target. Okay, the next slide, please. We asked manufacturers how easy they thought it was to implement savings. And the good news is that very few manufacturers see it as extremely difficult. By the same token, very few see it as being very easy. They see it as about average to difficult. And when you look at the rest of the data in the survey, that's pretty much in line with the other kind of problems that they have. So although they don't see it as a pushover, by and large manufacturers don't see it as an insurmountable problem. It's in line with the day-to-day issues that any manufacturer would face in terms of solving problems. Okay, next slide, please. Here we get on to some really quite interesting results. We were asked manufacturers about the complexity of managing resource efficiency, and it is seen as quite complex and disruptive. And this is certainly one of the problems that has been highlighted by the surveys, that when you have got rid of all the easy things to do in resource efficiency, or the very easy things to do, such as just buying a more efficient motor, you start to look at incremental improvements. And that's where a lot of the people who have been asked to be involved with resource efficiency start putting up barriers. For example, the most popular kind of employee or team chosen to implement resource efficiency is operations. But if you ask operations what their priorities are, really it's the smooth running of production. And if you're running operations, then your problems are downtime, quality of product. It's not really resource efficiency. And you have to ask, are these the right people and do they have the right training to implement resource efficiency? And this was a point that was really highlighted by one of the people we interviewed, Mark Adams, the managing director of a company called Vitsu, which makes shelving and furniture. And he builds resource efficiency into his recruitment program. He only wants to employ people who are like-minded. So from the get-go, anybody who works at Vitsu is somebody who is keen on resource efficiency. And he doesn't just say, right, operations, you're in charge of resource efficiency. He has found that it's about teamwork, that you need resource efficiency distributed throughout the company. Okay, next slide. We had to talk to and gauge the views of senior management, and because they are the people who make the decisions. And the good news is that senior management, by and large, is very supportive of resource efficiency. It's something that obviously senior management has to keep a very close eye on the bottom line, but they're also the people who set the company ethos, who set company values, and resource efficiency is being in line with all of those characteristics. So that's good news. However, implementing that kind of decision-making is difficult. In large companies, every company, there's a corporate culture, there's a particular way of doing things, and the teamwork required for implementing resource efficiency is seen by management as a real challenge. And next slide, please. Towards the end of the survey, we looked at the various IT systems that are necessary to run any company, any enterprise. And in particular, we asked what IT systems people have to enable continuous improvement, and whether managers and executives felt that they had access to this. And by and large, the answer was no. They all have IT systems. They're very good at collecting data, and collecting data is not seen as a problem. The problem lies with what do you do with that data? How do you analyze it? How do you enable that data to help you? And that, by and large, companies feel that what solutions that are out there are difficult to learn and use, that they very likely require expensive training, and as a result, startup is slow. And there are also concerns that solutions are expensive to buy, expensive to implement, and inevitably expensive to support. And that what they really want, don't we all, is something that's simple, inexpensive, and easy to use. And a real cherry on the cake would be something that helps to unify all the problems that are involved with resource efficiency into one single solution, and something that can draw in external expertise and external experience so that you can talk to other people who have faced the same problems and hear what solutions they come up with and apply the relevance to your own company. Next slide, please. This is my final slide before I hand on. So it's a mixed picture. I think the good news outweighs any barriers. I wouldn't call it bad news, just challenges. Pretty much everybody sees the value in resource efficiency. They see the opportunity. The people who run manufacturing companies are signed up to pursue resource efficiency, but it is seen as complex. It is seen as potentially disruptive, and creating the teamwork within a company to achieve resource efficiency is a challenge. It's not an insurmountable challenge, it's doable, but what manufacturers are really crying out for is a way of bringing all these problems together in a simple, efficient, and inexpensive way so that it can be distributed throughout the company and all members of staff from top to bottom to top can get involved and get a part of that £10 billion pie that Martin introduced at the beginning. That's me.
Matt, thank you very much indeed for that. Your finish there was a very good segue for me to introduce Nick Donoghue, who's the head of our product at Manufacture 2030 and who's been working on the bee. So he can pick up, hopefully, in about how the bee is, in many ways, that kind of central place that we're trying to create where all of that knowledge and capability can be brought together and be made available to people at no cost. So, Nick.
Possibly, though I can't claim to do all of that in the next couple of minutes. What I thought I would do, leading on from Matt's very helpful review of the key findings of the report, and the report will go out to everyone who's attended here afterwards. So I think it's best that everyone picks through and takes their own summary from it. The bit that I thought I'd overlay on top is actually, for us, it's so core to our mission to help people become best in class through simple tools and products that we've had to carefully consider what this report means for us too. And reflecting on the outcomes and the conclusions of the report, I picked through to find 3 or 4 key takeaways which we just thought we'd like to reflect on and share back in case they're helpful for anyone else. Before that, what really wasn't a surprise, thankfully, is that the results of this research align with a lot of other data sets and reports out there, which is actually a very positive thing, in that there is a wide acknowledgement that if you are not an artisan producer, if you use a lot of resources, then non-labour resource efficiency is clearly a big opportunity to increase margin. I guess the interesting bit is then how do you help people unlock that? at a faster rate. So 3 of the takeaways that we're taking as a business to share very briefly. And before I do that, just to give a sense of some of the businesses we're working with on our mission in terms of helping best-in-class become the norm, ranging right the way across sizes and scope of the manufacturing industry. So we like to make things challenging for ourselves by thinking right across the gamut of types of company, and lots of interesting names there to be reflecting on. So the first one, with a little bit of a cheesy picture to bring into the slide deck, is about helping to create that culture to act. The classic iceberg picture is what's underneath the water level outside of the mission statements and the strategy documents that actually helps to make a difference, which is a trend that we picked up in many of the questions within the research report. There can be the best will in the world, but the classic saying of culture eating strategy for breakfast seems to really resonate and apply for people in this sector. So how do we get beyond knowing and into doing when production and customer priorities seem to always rule with the people who tend to have responsibility for driving this agenda forwards? And what correlates with our observations working across many of the customers on the previous slide and many others is that these barriers presented by managing lots of projects across multiple functions is pretty much impossible to do at speed if the culture of the business isn't aligned and is supportive. The good thing on the flip side of that is that we've seen numerous times where even if a business culture isn't that aligned, one key senior colleague in the right place, say a plant manager, can make an absolutely stark positive difference, and likewise the other way around if necessary. And there are various common markers that both come out of this report document that I'll leave you to pick through, but also out of our observations that can help to expose that culture and, more importantly, can start to change it from within. And now we're, from a tool perspective for a Manufacture 2030, we're looking at how we can embed and make those visible as artifacts within our software and within the process that goes around that to help create that framework for action that sometimes gets ignored. So this can start with some simple things like creating the habits for reviewing a continuous improvement plan, actually having someone who cares at a senior enough level to wonder what progress is and why things are and aren't getting done. In turn with that, creating ways to give visibility to the right sets of people on the workflow and the progress against this agenda. Other key markers can be how many actual key colleagues have got responsibility for this scope of work. There's the classic thing that we find a lot with clients is while energy efficiency might be the domain of operations or engineering, the actual P&L for energy sits under someone in procurement or finance. So the incentives to improve are not always aligned, and the levers that people have to play with sometimes are a mismatch. So we can and will be doing more to build this into our tools in the future to help that below the line culture. Number 2, hopefully a few people will recognize this, and I may be showing my age by bringing this up, maybe not my nationality, but hey ho. Getting the right team set up is absolutely not just about the talent that you can assemble, it's how you assemble it. There's a great paragraph in the report which Matt didn't touch on, so I'll scan through quite quickly and paraphrase slightly from Steve Evans at the Manufacturing Institute at Cambridge University. He sums it up really well. One of the challenges is that in many larger organizations, what seems to be the natural home for resource efficiency is with the people who are not trained in efficiency. If you give it to general engineering, but you don't give them sufficient training, they may have the tools to do efficiency, but not the insight to apply it. If you create a specialist team in the center of your organization, they don't always understand the subtlety of how a particular factory works. They don't know where the real wastes are and where the real opportunities are. So teams from the center tend not to drive resource efficiency very rapidly, and local teams don't have the benefit of a well-resourced central team that can gather information by talking to experts. And he concludes the right answer is, of course, having a combination where possible of the above. Now, with our customers and our mission, we know, unfortunately, not every team we work with is blessed with the size to be able to support a central advanced team. So for us at Manufacture 2030, the trick is trying to replicate where there isn't one of these teams, or help supercharge where there is one of these teams, the impact that they can have to support resource efficiency across an organization. And therefore, we're doing a lot of work at the moment looking at the structure of how site teams operate, how they interact with group or corporate teams above them, and working out how to support those relationships with simple and common processes that are crucially as absolutely light touch as possible, because everyone's busy with other priorities, as this report again highlighted. And to develop on that further, how we manage and I'm sure this is faced by many of you listening, the diversion of lots of different tools and systems being used by different teams and where those interact. So there's an ongoing challenge there that we're trying to tackle head on. And the final takeaway, and I think Matt did cover this a little bit, was having meaningful targets. And there's a massive wealth of research about the psychology of targets. There are definitely pros and cons that we've both seen and taken out of that literature. But what was most interesting in this research is the focus on absolute targets. We've seen that this tends to be either for the very beginners, the people who've got low-hanging fruit left and can make considerable gains on their absolute consumption with relative ease, or actually for the super advanced who are ambitious enough to try and cut resource use even when they're also ambitious to grow their business. But combining these points and from our own data, we can certainly see that there seems to be an inertia to committing to a target, or to use a per unit measure when you have a lot of changing SKUs, for example, on the site. Everything can be thrown, and therefore often the decision is not to take a decision. So a specific challenge for us, which I'd love any thoughts on, if anyone has any, is actually how best to support target setting and critically the visualization of those targets in a way that is both robust enough to be motivating, but critically needs as little data as possible to keep it simple and actionable. It's very easy from what we've seen, again, working with different customers in different industries, to overcomplicate targets, and then they can be a drain on motivation rather than a motivator. And as I say, we'd absolutely love a chat on this if anyone has any thoughts on how that, and what that might look like. So they're very quickly 3 run-throughs of some of the insights from the report that we will take back into our business. There's lots more in here to pick through, and once you've had a look through, we'd be delighted to have a discussion with you and hear your feedback if anything stood out. And I think I will leave it at that and hand back to Martin.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. We're going to move to questions in a moment. Just to remind you though, everybody's going to get a recording, the research itself, and I'm sure a number of you will be interested to want to ask for a demo or more information on M2030B itself to see how we are putting into action the points that Nick just made. So anyway, to the question and answer, let's just see what questions we've got. In a second, just to say, we're going to be putting up the wonderful Emily's email address for you to reach out to us and make contact if you do want more information. So her email address will be up in a second. So, a couple of questions. What about here, I'm just going to read it off the screen for a second, so forgive me. What about the Energy Management System ISO 50001? I'm going to hand this to Nick at the moment, who I know has been giving some thought to how systems like ISO 2001 certification systems are, how we're aligning our product a bit more with them, and our thoughts about how the two might meet.
A fairly broad question. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. As far as I know, and Matt, please correct me if I'm wrong here, the research didn't specifically cover how people are using standards to tackle and manage their resource efficiency, and if there was any correlation in performance between those who do use standards such as ISO 50001 and those who don't?
That's correct. We were only interested at this level in terms of whether they looked at absolute consumption or per unit produced consumption. If you ask too many questions, people stop answering questions. So we had to draw a line somewhere.
I think certainly from what I understand and the people that we've worked with who are using ISO 50001, there is some debate as to the legitimacy of the new requirements to demonstrate continuous improvement, because in a way it penalizes people who are advanced in this area anyway. But from those who got on board early with ISO 50001, I've only heard positive things, especially around the cultural side of things, which I mentioned in my reflections on the report, in that being able to take something like a standard, which you want externally audited and accredited, and ensure that you've got board sign-off for the processes that sit underneath that, can only be a helpful thing in terms of raising the agenda and the priority of energy efficiency in this case, but also with the other ISO standards.
Thank you. Matt, just a general question. Was there anything in the research that particularly surprised you, or that was of particular importance and built on other work and research you've been doing at the manufacturer?
I think the 2 points that maybe surprise isn't quite the right word. I wasn't expecting such a positive response from senior management. I mean, they have so many things on their minds, particularly, Brexit, for example, the general productivity problem. They are spread so thin. For them to come out quite so strongly in terms of supporting resource efficiency, I thought was very encouraging. And I thought also the attitudes to risk of disruption, that was much stronger than I expected. That was I think there's a real, I don't quite know what the right word would be. Warning isn't quite the right word, but I think that's an issue that anybody who wants to get involved with resource efficiency really needs to know how to answer that question from the get-go, because there will be a lot of people who won't be anti-resource efficiency, but they'll say, this is not my priority. I've got a multi-million-pound production line here. I've got to care about quality. I can't afford for it to stop for 1 second. I'm all behind resource efficiency, but you've got to explain to me how it's not going to compromise my priorities. I think those are the things that really shone out to me. That anybody who wants to get behind resource efficiency, and everybody must know how to tackle that. And as we've already explained, a lot of it is about teamwork. A lot of it is about making sure that there are the right tools for people to do the right jobs, because there will be people in organizations who will simply say, I'm worried. Is this going to stop my production line? And one of the ways around it, when we spoke to Coty, was they said, well, we tackle things when the production line is being is down for regular maintenance. There was no need to interrupt the production line to put in a new motor or to plug a leak or whatever it was. We built it into part of the general factory management process. So there are ways around these problems, but some people need to be reassured.
I'd agree with all of that, Matt. One of the interesting things that we observe working across lots of different manufacturing companies is actually even some of the most complex and high utilization plants are still able to make changes that improve their efficiency. And it does all come down to that cultural appetite to make change and putting up the correct procedures in place to be able, as you say, if there's a momentary shutdown, whip in and change things, to find ways around it, to challenge, to give teams the accountability and the tools and responsibility to be able to act in the right type of ways, mitigating as many risks as possible, of course, to production. But what's interesting is that although there's pushback on we've got a plant to run, customer priorities to deliver by some, some in exactly the same position still manage to get it done. So it's not it's not to say it's not difficult, but it's not maybe the blocker that it sometimes feels like it is.
Exactly, it's a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's as always with these things, it's about communication and teamwork, and somebody at the top saying you need to find a solution. The company is behind you. Don't ignore this, but let's work constructively.
There's another question here from Rupert Wiley about the scale and potential for resource efficiency in the food and possibly the farming sectors. So Rupert, the research that I quoted earlier at the beginning from the Institute of Manufacturing in Cambridge was done largely with UK manufacturers, and of course in the UK, the largest manufacturing sector is food and drink. So I am absolutely certain from just recalling the research now that there are significant figures coming in from there that contributed to that figure, that if everybody could get to best in class within the food and drink sector, they'd be adding something in the region of 12% to their bottom line. So there's no doubt about it, very big opportunities in food and drink and in agricultural food processing. One of our bigger group users of the M2030B is a food processing company, and we have 11 of their plants using the tool and clearly seeing benefit from it.
One interesting observation we've had from working with, or maybe overclaiming interesting, one observation we've had working with lots of food and farming sector businesses is because the margins tend to be so tight, actually it can be a very powerful motivator to think about number of extra units you'd need to sell to get the same bottom line gains as some of the cost reductions that you can take through resource efficiency. Because if your margin is between 1% and 5%, actually you need to sell a lot more units than if you reduce your input costs by 5%. And that can make some really interesting comparisons of if we set our targets at 3% savings, that's X amount of million extra loaves of bread that we don't have to go out and flog, or tubes of toothpaste, or whatever it may be. So it really works well there, because on the whole they tend to be very margin pressured manufacturing.
Matt,
yes, I was just going to make one small point actually. When one of the companies I interviewed, which was Barfoot's, which is works in the food sector. They produce fresh produce, and they talked about waste management, which I thought was very interesting. We're always focused on sort of electricity and other things, but there are other things that companies can do. And they said that one of the drivers for them in terms of their attitude to waste, whether it was cardboard or plastic or whatever, was the fact that China is no longer the dustbin of the world. They're no longer recycling all our waste. We have to find solutions for our own waste problems. And that was becoming more expensive for them. And that was a real driver for them in terms of finding new solutions, one of which was to take the residue from processed vegetables and burn it to produce electricity. So there are lots of interesting ways to do things.
Thank you, Matt. Something that struck me in the research and in our experience of our customers using the bee is the balance between providing the knowledge, the know-how that people need in factories to manage hundreds of small actions that can continuously improve processes and reduce resource use. The measurement processes and reporting processes needed to set targets and to manage the process. And then thirdly, the culture, which both you and Nick touched upon. If you were to sort of say, in your experience and from what you saw in the research, where the balance of need is greatest, is it in the knowledge, is it in the processes, measurement, reporting, management, or is it in actually getting the culture right? Where would you put the emphasis?
I think for me, the culture is probably always going to be the most important. by culture, I sort of include things like teamwork, because in any company, but especially large companies, there's always a risk of siloing departments, and that really it's management that has to make sure that doesn't happen, that breaks down the interdepartmental barriers where everybody ends up saying, this is not my problem, I've got more important things to do. You want me to save a few £100 on a production line that is producing £10,000 worth of product every day. It's just not something that's important for me. I think it's the culture. I think it's getting those things right. In terms of sort of acquiring knowledge, that is also very useful. We didn't hear a huge amount of comment about that from the respondents. I think for SMEs, that's probably particularly pertinent. The smaller a company is, the more difficult it is they are going to find to have somebody who is solely focused on resource efficiency or even half-resourced, and that the opportunity to share experience with other companies is probably particularly pertinent for them. I'm sorry, I can't remember the third item you mentioned. What was it?
So the third was culture, it was knowledge, and then it was the sort of management, the measurement, reporting and management tools, if you like, and systems.
That certainly, I mean, they all wanted something that was cheap and simple to use. I mean, that's kind of a truism for almost anything, but I think there was a real feeling that what is out there is expensive and difficult to use by and large. Or it's something that is really not properly designed for the job that we're talking about. So whether it's just using generic spreadsheets or using other pieces of software and enterprise systems that the company's already using to sort of, I don't know, monitor the purchase of products or the management of a production line, that there was a lack of something that has been designed from the bottom up to do this particular job. And that certainly came through. But what they wanted was a tool that was actually designed for this job, as opposed to a tool that was being adapted for this job.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I think that probably draws this webinar to a close. I just want to thank Matt from the manufacturer and Nick, our head of product here, for their contributions. I hope you found that very interesting. We will be, of course, as I said earlier, sending everybody a copy of the research and a transcript and recording of the webinar itself. And I do hope some of you are inspired to want to find out more about Manufacture 2030 and the B and how it can help make resource efficiency simple for you. In which case, please reach out to Emily Devine at manufacture2030.com. Her email is on the screen in front of you. And we would be delighted to give you more information and so on and so forth. Thank you very much indeed. With that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you.